Welcome to Split Reels, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of movies and discuss everything from cult classics to hidden gems. I am one of your hosts, Nate, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brody.
Hey, everybody.
Today is going to be a deep dive into Paul Thomas Anderson's cinematic classic, There Will Be Blood. Adapted from the Upton Sinclair novel, Oil, this film is an absolute powerhouse. It touches on the ideas of the American dream, separation of church and state, parenthood, and many more things.
The movie was released December 26, 2007, the day after Christmas, one of the most religious holidays we have. And it's a very capitalistic movie, and it made a bunch of money. It had a budget of $25 million. Opening weekend, only $190,000.
It really flopped the opening weekend.
But then it grossed over $76 million worldwide, 3 times its budget. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, winning 2, Best Actor and Best Cinematography. The score, however, couldn't be used because it was used in previous works, which I think is a shame because the score really amplified so many of the scenes for me.
Yeah, it was tribal in a lot of those scenes, and it was like, whoa, but I think the one song I'm thinking of, and I don't remember what it is, it was used in another movie, so they disqualified it. That's why they're like, oh, I can't have it. That's weird.
Yeah, it was an original.
Dumb, but hey, let's the Academy for it.
And it also lost out on Best Picture and Adapted Screenplay to No Country for Old Men. It was shot 2.39 to 1's ratio, which I think is very unique.
Yep. And it was like Paul Thomas Anderson's niche where he like sits at. He switched after this movie to a different aspect ratio and was like, I don't like it. So then he switched right back.
Then There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men were both filmed in Marfa, Texas at the same time. Both of those movies came out the same year. Both went to the Oscars. Both are fantastic movies.
There was a scene in No Country for Old Men that was being filmed right next to where they were doing testing. In There Will Be Blood, they would blow up that oil
big
derrick.
oil rig.
They did the testing for that to see how it would work, and it put a huge plume of smoke into the sky. So the filming that was going on for No Country for Old Men had to be halted for the day.
Yeah, to shut down the whole production. That's cost so much money.
It does. So let's jump into Paul Thomas Anderson, some of his previous work. The Master with Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Fantastic.
Yeah, great movie. And also like really weird, a good character study movie. Magnolia. I don't know if you've seen that one yet. That is a very weird biblical movie. There's points where frogs are raining from the sky. The beginning of that movie really grabs you with how 3 people died at the same time, all because one action happened.
Interest, like the butterfly effect type thing.
Yeah, 100%. And then Boogie Nights with Burt Reynolds and Mark Wahlberg. Dirk Diggler, he plays a porn star in the 80s, which is a really odd premise for a movie, but it starts off in this really cool atmosphere, like everything's going great, and then totally takes a deep dive, which you see a little bit in this too.
Yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson, I haven't seen a ton of his movies. I've only seen Licorice Pizza, which is a newer one.
That has Philip Seymour Hoffman's son in it. That's the main actor, which I thought was a cool homage because PTA tried to have Philip Seymour Hoffman in every one of his movies. He loved him. And he specifically made it so that Philip Seymour Hoffman wasn't in this movie.
Oh.
He was originally going to play the right-hand man to Daniel Day.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't put him in this movie. I think this is the only PTA movie that doesn't have him in it when he was alive.
This is the first Daniel Day-Lewis performance.
Yeah. Whoa.
I may have watched Gangs of New York when I was like a teenager and it was on TV, but I don't remember any of it. After watching this, I do want to watch his entire catalog.
All right, so let's think about the time that this movie was filmed and the time that this movie was set. It was filmed in 2007, but it takes place in the early 20th century, 1898 up to 1911, I think it is. Since this is a period piece, the more important scene to set is the beginning of the 20th century. During this time, we had the Spanish-American War, fighting over Cuba. The U.S. just annexed Hawaii. There was the Boxer Rebellion in China. Teddy Roosevelt becomes president after McKinley dies. And in cinematic news, The Great Train Robbery was released in 1903. It was like one of the first big movies, I think, that ever came out. And then as the end of the Gold Rush era, and that drives us to the beginning when you see Daniel Plainview kind of trying to prospect like the Gold Rush era, but a little bit different. He's like the tail end of those people. This movie is based on a book by Upton Sinclair called Oil. Upton Sinclair based Daniel Plainview, who is not called Daniel Plainview in the book, but we'll call him Daniel Plainview just for the sake of talking about this, was based on this guy named Edward Doheny. Both were from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and it was before the Standard Oil monopoly breakup. This book dives into it, much like Upton Sinclair's other novel called The Jungle. That was about the meatpacking industry during this time. It was basically a commentary on the ethical standards of the worker and how bad it was. He talks about people getting ground up in these machines.
That's why we got Ocean.
So he took that mentality when he wrote Oil. It was a little bit about the oil industry, but mostly about the ideas of socialism and the politics of the time. And then it dives into the Teapot Dome scandal. The book takes from that, so you get lines, and one of the most famous lines in the movie is from the Teapot Dome scandal, actual words spoken in Congress. The movie was based on the first 150 pages, but it focuses more on the characters rather than the politics and socialism.
It really takes on the characters and makes that the main focus.
And that's where you get this classic character study look.
And then we fast forward to 2006 when this movie was written, filmed. The economy was beginning to slow down from bankers and realty, huge influence from capitalism.
Then you see in movies like The Big Short talking about the economy at the time. But you can see how that plays a little bit into this movie. It's a commentary about someone who gets super rich by stealing resources from everybody else. It's the same idea. And maybe there was some thought process that went in with that.
One other thing I read was during this time, Paul Thomas Anderson wrote this with Daniel Day-Lewis in mind and was pitching them the idea. They had the movie written in 2005, but it took them 2 years to get financing to film this. Because like when you look at it, 1900s period piece about oil, who wants to see that?
Exactly. I listened to this interview with Paul Thomas Anderson and Daniel Day-Lewis. They talked about trying to sell this movie to a studio. And one of the lines was, we want to sell this period piece that has no women in it all. And our main character is going to be in every scene of the movie but one. At the time, I would be like, that's a big ask. But you do have Daniel Day-Lewis, which is nice. He had this discography of great movies beforehand. But it was still a bit of a push to try to get it done. And you can see that in the opening day. Everyone was like, what is this movie?
A horror movie of sorts with him being a monster.
It's a mind-bending horror movie. And that's
to be like an A24 horror movie these days.
Oh, for sure, dude, for sure.
All right. Let's grab your pickaxe and dig in.
Let's start right at the beginning of the movie. We're met by Daniel Plainview, who we don't know is Daniel Plainview yet, going to town on a rock wall with a pickaxe. No talking.
And it's also super dark, super silent.
Yeah.
There's no score at this moment.
Yep. It's got that feeling to make it feel eerie. Ooh, something is off. I could talk for about an hour about this
opening scene.
Oh my God. It sets the stage of this movie. By the end of it, I'm like, holy shit, who is this guy? You see him start pickaxing and he's going up and down this ladder. He's trying his best to just make something of himself. This is where right at the beginning, we dive into the idea of the American dream. This dude is working his ass off to try to make something of himself. And every step of the way that we'll see now, he runs into something. He falls all the way down that shaft.
Breaks his leg.
That scene spooks me still. It's, oh God, Jesus, what's going on? And then he climbs himself all the way up. Go back to the cinematography of this movie, which is fantastic. They do that pan up scene and you can see the whole landscape. And you're like, oh, whoa. And he pushes himself all the way there just to get the silver.
It's funny because they make a point to show explicitly he's grabbing that rock. As he's in pain, his leg's broken, and he's trying to hoist himself up. He makes sure to grab that.
Exactly. I don't care about my broken leg right now. It does a quick cut. We're introduced to Daniel Plainview through his pen. I love that introduction to a character. You see him do all these things. You're like, who the hell is this guy? And then it cuts to him and he's signing that check at the end so that he can get paid by those people. And it goes, Daniel Plainview.
Yeah, but it's interesting because as a first-time viewer watching this, I don't know what he's doing in that hole, what he's grabbing. And you see him laying on the floor in the area where he's trying to sell whatever he grabbed. And on the paper, silver and gold. He signs that off to him. What does he get? $300 some for it?
Yep.
And then, yeah, the story is being driven by the visuals and the actions of the characters. It doesn't need any dialogue. The characters are designing an oil rig and discovering the oil on the land. You can see what he's doing with that money he risked his life for, trying to further it and make more money. I'm sure with that money, he just took it and hired people because he knew he couldn't do it alone anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I'm done with this. I'm going to make
Mhm.
somebody else go down and do these
Yeah.
kind of things. After they get this oil scene set up, there's a drill for oil in a way, not the way that we would think of it now.
Mhm.
But then down in the bottom of that shaft, and that derrick that he makes breaks, and all that oil comes crashing down
Yeah,
on
just
him.
impales that dude.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that surprised me. I was not ready for that. I didn't know what I was expecting going into it. I know it's titled There Will Be Blood. I didn't know how much blood there would be, but yeah, I feel like the oil and the blood go hand in hand because it's always just bleeding out of the ground, bleeding out of people.
I think Paul Thomas Anderson consciously made that decision to try to make blood and oil very similar in this movie,
Mhm.
to see that the lifeblood of society at this time, like the beginning of the automobile, was oil, and the lifeblood of humans is obviously blood.
Yeah.
So that first speechless scenes in the movie are very just it's powerful, man. It's you're drawn right into the beginning of this movie and you're like, holy shit, what is going to happen? And then in that scene too, when that buckets come down and kill that guy, that's the first time the cinematographer focuses on Daniel Plainview's. And I
Mhm.
think Daniel Plainview's eyes in this movie speak to his inner soul. And that's
Yeah.
Daniel Day-Lewis to a T. But you can see he has that, oh man, that was almost me, which ties back into the idea of the American dream. It's hard work and perseverance for the American dream that, everyone else gets. But it's also just sheer luck. He had a 50-50 chance of dying down there. It was him or the other guy. And he didn't die. And you can see it on his face.
I think that starts to be when he's okay. I want to further myself, but I don't necessarily need to put myself in danger.
Yeah, and back to Upton Sinclair's too, is like, I'll put the worker at danger, not me. You can see that change in Daniel Plainview from being, I'm going to be a hard worker, to the next jump, the beginning of Act 2. The next jump is when he goes and he's starting to sell himself.
Yeah, it jumps another 9 years, so it's 1911 now, and it's finally the first word spoken in the movie, nearly 15, 16 minutes in. He's looking for new land to mine oil, and now that he has HW with him, he's a family man with a family business trying to put on that show. HW is his partner. He's drilling his own oil now, spreading across the country. One thing that struck me is during that opening dialogue scene, he's giving that speech to that's probably almost the whole town.
Yep.
And they're not necessarily buying it and they're arguing with him and they're trying to figure it out. And he's just like, okay, I'm not going to sit here and argue with it. It's not worth my time. I know I can find somewhere else that will just give me what I want. And he just dusts his hands off with it and walks away.
Where it jumps to him in his office and we get introduced to Paul Sunday, Paul Dano's first character.
It's early in his career for Paul Dano, just after Little Miss Sunshine. We get to meet Paul. And Paul Dano was only supposed to play that small character of Paul, but he also plays Eli.
Knowing his future work after this, you can see how Paul Dano would want to play this weird, idiosyncratic character.
Yeah, I think it would have been a shame just to have him play Paul, because Paul has such a minor role.
Yeah.
Eli is really where the meat of it.
On the same note of meeting Paul and doing these things, we're introduced to the first bit of symbolism in this movie. In my opinion, I didn't see much other symbolism besides oil and the Sunday family. Sunday family representing the ideas of religion and that.
Fate.
And I find it funny that their last name is Sunday because what is supposed to be the holiest day? Sunday. So you see that, and that's this nod of saying you need to think about these people as religious already.
What does that say then about Paul Sunday coming here and basically selling out his family? He's pretty much coming to Daniel and saying, hey, up on my father's land, there's a bunch of oil there, and I think you can have it if I just get a little piece of the pie. Like, he's just selling out his own family.
He wants to be the one to kick himself off, the Judas in a way.
Escape.
Yep. So Paul has been introduced, and we can see their two characters' interaction. We first see Daniel interacting with the public. He's got this persona on that he's a family man, and he wants to make everyone prosper. And then we see him dealing on an individual basis with Paul. And you can see right as he walks in, again with Daniel Day-Lewis's eyes, he's instantly skeptical of this guy. Wait a minute, who is it? I'm not going to believe what you're saying. Where are you from? What's going on? Asks his name, I think, twice, just so he can really get it. But by the end of that interaction he has, you can see he has a little bit of respect for the guy. Because the way that Paul Dano plays Paul in this part is totally different than the way Eli is.
Mm-hmm.
And that speaks to Paul Dano as a actor. They're two totally different people. The way that he pushes himself through that interaction, he says, I think he says first, I want $500 for this. And then he goes, 600. You want to keep asking questions? We can go the other way. And Daniel Day-Lewis's character, Daniel Plainview, can see
he
that.
Respects that.
And Paul, he's, oh, okay, this dude's a businessman. He wants to do some dealings. And I respect that in a person. He's a go-getter like me. So Paul tells him about Little Boston, small little town, nothing grows. And you can tell that Daniel Plainview knows, like, hey, these are the things that need to be growing there. That was the water, blah, blah, blah. Finally, he gives up where he lives and what's going on. And HW and him go to Little Boston to check it out.
Disguised as quail hunters looking for a spot to camp. They visit the Sunday's property. And just like, how wild is it that strangers can just show up? You run outside, greet them. You're like, let's get you some goat's milk. You need some food? We got potatoes. And then you got bread? Nope, don't have bread.
Yeah, I thought the same thing too, watching it again. If someone showed up at my house, I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing here? Get away from me. There is that one line that sticks to me, and this is a very personal note. He says, let me send my family to help you set up your tent. And Daniel Plainview says, no, please. We set ourselves on this camping trip. We have to do the camping. And for me, this is a little personal anecdote, that always sits with me. Like when someone tries to offer me help and be like, no, I did this myself. I will ask you if I need help. Do not offer it to me.
Then we get to meet Eli, Paul's brother and preacher. Kel O'Neill was originally supposed to be cast as Sunday. He filmed some scenes, and then reports have it that he had difficulty working with PTA. He wasn't able to give him what he wanted as a character, and PTA just fired him.
No way.
And went to Dano and was like, hey, you want this role? You got a couple days to prepare for.
Yeah, he had 3.5. I do know that part, but Kel O'Neill, I tried to find his work that he had done, and there was like nothing.
Yeah, he hasn't done much.
What a shit show that would have been.
Yeah.
You could have been in one of the biggest, at least in my opinion, biggest, most influential movies of cinema, and you get kicked out after being there for a week.
And then what's interesting, we don't know it at this moment in time with Eli, but by the end of it, this movie is like toe-to-toe Eli versus Daniel throughout the movie, going back and forth, tit for tat.
Yep.
To lose out on that. And then also for how lucky it is for Dano to get that opportunity. What if that role would have been played by someone else that had more gravitas like Daniel? What if it was Philip Seymour Hoffman? Would it still work? I don't know.
Oh my God, Daniel Day-Lewis was amazing. It would have been that fight back and forth, being like, oh, I don't know who this movie's really about kind of thing.
Let Daniel Day-Lewis shine, but also boosted up Dano. And really it was like, oh, who's this guy? His
performance in this movie is fantastic. I wouldn't want to see anybody else in that.
Later on that night, Daniel and HW are talking. HW is trying to discuss the negotiation plans for the land. And he's asking him how much he'll give him. And Daniel says, I'll give them quail price.
Yeah, that's spoken like a true businessman. I'm not going to give them oil prices. They're going to get quail prices. Then it jumps right into the negotiation. And Eli and the dad, Abel, again, another biblical name. You see them trying to interact. You can see that Eli is the one who runs that family. Instantly, you already know Abel is a weak man.
You can tell by the way he's talking.
The actor who plays him does a good job of playing that role.
There's so many characters in this movie played by actors that I really haven't seen before or after this.
And speaking on that front, the boy who plays HW was actually just a school kid in the local area. They put him out there. Okay, we'll have this kid play HW. He's never had an acting credit after this. And they showed his mom Gangs New York so she would know who Daniel Day-Lewis was. And she was fraught and like, oh my God, you can't do this. So they sent him, I think it was like Age of Innocence, the movie that he had done. And they're like, oh, watch this. He's actually a really calm spoken man. And if we know anything about Daniel Day-Lewis now, after all of his movies are done, he becomes a cobbler. He just makes shoes. Like when you see him play Daniel Day-Lewis, that dude would put a gun to my head and kill me if it meant that he would get ahead.
But in real life, he's probably the complete opposite. Chill dude.
Really calm. Hey, I'm not going to be mad about anything. I'll make my shoes. Just call me. It speaks so much to who he is as an actor to be able to do this kind of thing.
Going back to the chat where they're negotiating for the price of the Sunday's land, you can tell Eli isn't taking shit. He knows Daniel is trying to rip off his dad. Eli knows there's oil on the land, and he starts saying, no, we want oil money for this land. We don't want quail money. And Eli, he's trying to get ahead in his own way by saying, okay, for $10,000 for the church, you can.
And that's where you see these two people who are very similar deep down.
Yeah.
Really try to battle against each other. They first meet eye to eye, and you can see Daniel Plainview be like, fuck this guy. You want to bring the people here to do the oil? And calls him out on his BS. And then you see Eli kind of be like, haha, I'm getting the better of you.
And it's fun to see that throughout the movie, how annoyed he is.
I love that interaction because I have people that I've known in my life that I'm like, oh, don't say another word. I'm going to fucking explode.
Yeah, but I love how Daniel is sticking to his guns of saying, no, I'm a quail hunter. I want this land for quail hunting, but I could get some oil people up here to take a look at it. So I'll give you 5,000.
This is the second time that you see Daniel Plainview talk about trying to be a family man. When he goes into these sales aspects, he's not really selling the idea of, I'm going to do work that we make money. He's selling the idea that I'm a family man and I want you guys to be like me.
And then they finally strike a deal, Daniel, Abel, and Eli. So everybody gets a little bit. Daniel gets the land. And now that he has a little bit of land, he's going around trying to see what all the land around is and see what they bought the land for to try to see what he can try to buy it for. Very cunning businessman.
Yeah, he knows instantly, I've already pressed the button that this deal is going to go off and people are going to try to raise their prices. I need to do this now. So he goes to that realtor. I need it. Boom, boom, boom. Can that be had?
Why it's very smart for him to gather the whole community and make that pitch to everybody all at once.
And almost catch them off guard too. Because if one person's, oh, that sounds like a great deal to me, the group mentality would be like, oh, I'm going to do the same thing that they are. I want to get in on my money too.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see how he convinces them. I mean, he talks of hope and of making their town prosperous, building roads, creating a well for water, having employment. Their lives are going to flourish by him being there.
That speech he gives to Little Boston, once he gets everybody together here, and that's the next scene after going to the realtor, was largely improvised by Daniel Day-Lewis. When PTA saw that after filming it, he said, quote, "It was delicious, Plainview on a platter." Like, to see Daniel Day-Lewis, again, just speaking him up.
Let him go.
Yeah, just let him do his thing. And it was like exactly who he would have been in that time. It was amazing to watch that. You can see that mentality change, being like, I'm a cunning businessman too. I know how I need to sell.
You switch on a different...
I'll say fucking anything to get you to buy something at that point.
Mm-hmm. But then Eli is still listening and he's concerned about the church.
Yes, exactly.
And as soon as he speaks up, what about the church? And Daniel, of course, you can see immediately how annoyed he is. Eli even said anything.
Yeah,
we'll make the first road go to the church. Fine, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like to appease you to move on.
In that perfect Daniel Plainview voice, oh, that's the first place it'll lead.
Yep.
Thank you, Eli.
Yeah, you can tell how full of shit he is.
Exactly. It goes into Eli wanting to bless the well. And you see this, that Daniel's already sitting, talking business with one of the other people who are starting to put up the derrick. And Eli walk in, and you can tell instantly, again, with Daniel Day-Lewis's eyes, that he's, who the hell is this guy?
He just keeps showing. Yeah. When you see that with Eli walking in, you see he has that confidence, even with this guy that is frustrated and annoyed with him, but he doesn't care. He wants his self-interest of making it a little bit about him, of saying, hey, please introduce me, say, I'm the son or whatever. Like, talks himself up and has this weird little description of himself.
Tend his father's flock and do all this. You can see Daniel's like, shut off.
And we can do that.
How's 4 o'clock sound?
Yeah, just trying to appease him so he can move on without conflict.
Exactly.
And that's where you can keep seeing that he's avoiding conflict at all costs.
After that interaction, Daniel jump into trying to bless the well in his own way.
God bless you.
Yep. And he's like, I'll do it, because he wants to put on that front to people. But then you see the first act of, I'm going to mess you up, Eli. Stop trying to mess with me. And when he takes Eli's line of a proud daughter of these hills, he said, not a proud son of these hills. He says it about his sister. And he like looks at Eli right in the time as in, leave me alone. Stop messing with me.
You immediately see Eli is annoyed as soon as they skipped over him. And later, after that scene, you see even Mr. Sunday is a little annoyed when they're all sitting down eating lunch.
Yep. And there's a good deleted scene in there. This is that fishing scene right after starting the oil well and after seeing the interaction between Daniel and Abel. With Daniel is visibly drunk. He grabs little Mary Sunday and he says, oh, shouldn't hit kids. And then he looks directly at Abel. Yeah, dude, I'm saying that to you. You shouldn't hit your kids. We see this little bit of family man peek out through Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
He wants this family, this sort of life, but he doesn't know how to have these interactions with people.
I'm curious if they would have left that in, because you do start to see that he does care for and love HW in his own weird way.
Yeah.
He's not good at expressing it, but you can tell he does care about him.
Yeah, and there's another deleted scene later on that kind of explains what's going on, and we'll get into that once the scene pops up. That scene where he talks about Mary being beaten by Abel, that's in the movie. He says that directly to him, and you can see it. And then after that, you can see Abel in the deleted scene goes up to Daniel and says, I want you to know that you're on the wrong path. You need to go to my son, who is this great person, and ask for the forgiveness of God. And then right afterwards, his problems are solved. Maybe you guys will have listened to it at this point, but it's an interesting view to really see who Abel is, because the rest of the movie, he only has 2 lines. But in this deleted scene, you understand that he's just a follower of his son who's a lunatic. Same with Daniel. He just sits there as a meek little bitch boy. Sorry, but.
And then we cut to Daniel being woken up on the floor. You can tell that he's hammered drunk.
One thing that we did forget to talk about, speaking on alcohol, is that at the beginning when he gets HW.
Oh, yeah, he takes a big old swig and tries to give HW a little.
Yeah, on his bottle. And I said, oh, that's weird. And then later on in the movie, you see him pour half a pint into his lamb's milk and forces the little boy to drink it. And you're like, what is this all about?
And this is where he's woken up drunk and other people tell him that 2 other workers dropped a big piece from the well and it went down and impaled another guy. All they do is just fish him out, and you can tell Daniel is concerned not about the men, but about the optics of the situation. He had just gotten it up and running. He had just gotten everybody to buy into it, and now somebody has already died. The first thing he does is he goes to the guy's tent where his cot is and goes through his belongings. And I found that interesting that he took the cross out of his belongings. I found that fascinating. Do you think it's like a symbolism of rejection of the faith and morals, of just like taking that away from him?
Yeah, I could definitely see it that way. The way that he hands it over in that scene, you can see he doesn't even look at it to the guy and goes, oh, look. It's almost like a way of saying, what an idiot. Like, I don't believe in that. Get this away from me. And in that scene, too, when he realizes that guy had died down the well, he never once says, oh, man, that's so sad that he died or what's going on.
Yeah.
All he said was, when you go down into the well, you tell somebody, right? And then it's done.
Yep.
There's no remorse. That dude's an idiot. He died.
The next thing we see is Eli preaching. And this is where we see how intense it is and how much of a show he puts on for everybody. It's a terrific performance by Dano.
Yeah.
And we see that Daniel shows up to watch him, but also to tell him about the accident. Eli is saying that they're just working too hard. They shouldn't be working so much. They should be coming to church. It's dangerous to work while drinking. And then they're just sitting there arguing about spending too much time at church and they should be drilling more. You can see that tension start to build. I did find that entire performance, that was the first time I was just like, I couldn't tell if he was just putting on a show or if he actually believed what he was doing. That was my first time of doubting him.
So you saw that scene as like, this guy's putting on a show a bit.
Yeah, he's trying to use them to get ahead and make himself a bigger preacher. That was the first time I was like, I feel like he's just doing this not necessarily because he believes the religion.
He's a showman, and people are into that because they're in the middle of nowhere, little Boston. In that scene, though, when we see Eli doing his preaching, we are propelled from Daniel's life and being this oil and like progressive, I'm going to beat someone's ass and get my shit done. And we're propelled into somebody else's view in the life of saying they're doing the same thing, but mining for different resources. They're not mining for oil. They're not mining for silver. They're mining for spirituality.
Yeah.
And trying to get resources from everyone else and milking that resource and saying, I need to get what I get. So you see the two people who are supposedly different, but are actually doing the same thing. And that's where they meet. They clash in this sort of Superman versus Batman kind of feel like, oh, who's going to be the better one? And that's why they never listen to each other.
Yeah. And you see that tension build throughout the movie until it explodes. And we can talk about that later. Then the next scene, that's where we finally see the oil rig sitting there. This is the oil below scene. This is where I first started to appreciate the cinematography is great, this movie.
We haven't talked about the cinematography of this movie enough because it is masterclass. Paul Thomas Anderson had this 1911 43 millimeter camera with a special lens on it. He had that lens modified so it could fit on a regular film camera of today. He filmed certain scenes in this movie, and you can see them if you look at the sides of the frame. You can see this little vignette. Like,
I was wondering why that vignette was there.
It's this really old camera from the time period to film these scenes. One of the scenes shown is where baby HW and Daniel Plainview are riding on the train together. You can see a little vignette when it shows that oil derrick on fire. You can see the vignette around the side.
I'm curious why he chose specific scenes to use that specifically, not necessarily shoot a lot more.
I'm not sure. Maybe he was trying to make a stance on saying, hey, these were somewhat real pictures of what would have happened in that time.
This is where I started to really love the score as well. You see the explosion, and then that's where it gets that click, 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 like chaoticness, where you actually see Daniel care for HW. He doesn't care about anything else at the moment. He runs to HW, gets him, runs him back. As soon as HW is safe, he can't hear, but he's fine.
Yeah.
Then he goes and watches his oil, and he watches it all night as that click, 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 click is going on all the way until the morning as it's burning. He doesn't even go back or care about HW anymore at that point. He knows HW is fine, but he cares about his money, his oil.
Yeah, that his right-hand man asks, and I find this kind of interesting too, a little bit of opposing to what you're saying here. He asks, he goes and gets HW, makes sure that he's okay, sets him down. He's out of harm's way. So he's not going to be injured anymore. And then he goes out and they're watching this oil burn. And he says the line, what are you mad about? I have a whole ocean of oil under my feet and I'm the only one who can get it. And that's where he's not thinking about his boy anymore. He's thinking about, I'm the one who's going to be able to get all this shit. And this is me. So he's pumped. And then the right-hand man asks him, how's HW? Is HW okay?
He says,
no, he's not okay. And Daniel doesn't move, but the right-hand man goes to HW.
Yeah, Daniel just stays looking at the potential for all that money.
Yep. And on the score where you start to really fall in love with that, if you listen to the beat of that, it's like a heartbeat. It's a da-da-dun, da-da-dun, da-da-dun. And it like raises as things are going and he's running around. So you have this almost Dunkirk kind of feel of anxiety building.
For me, this was one bad thing after another. Maybe should he have let Eli just bless the well? Would that have solved all his problems and not had the guy die and the oil thing blow up? But then, I mean, it cuts to the morning. Daniel then blows up the well. He just has men on wheels, he just wheels up barrels of dynamite and they have these little wheels.
Yeah. And there's interesting signs behind that because you're never going to put out that oil fire because it's oil. So you have to pull all the oxygen away from it.
Oh, so that's why okay. I was like, why is he doing this?
So you have to
like suffocate it.
Yeah. So he blows that up and sends out that huge shockwave to make all the oxygen go away really quickly. And they packed it full of probably a half ton of TNT.
Yeah. There was a lot of dynamite.
That would have made a big explosion.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty big scene coming up here where Eli finally approaches Daniel asking for the money that he still owed for the church. And he wants his $5,000. And then immediately Daniel just starts beating the shit out of him.
Oh, yeah.
And you can just see that pent up rage just like coming out of him as he's just slapping literally the shit out of him.
Yeah.
and he's calling him.
I'll bury you underground, you sniveling ass. Like, I hate you. And I will say this too, and it like to show that these two characters are very similar. There was no like thought about, oh, what's Daniel going through right now after something like that. He instantly comes over and tries to get his money from him. And he should have known that HW was deaf at the time. And he comes over to ask for money.
Yeah, especially because he is supposed to be the preacher. He's supposed to be the caring one for everybody in the community and making sure everybody is okay.
Yeah, and you can see that's not who he is. In the same way, Daniel being like, oh, I'm supposed to be the person bringing all these people up. And he doesn't give a shit about them. He just wants to get his resources and leave. So after the scene of Eli getting his ass beat, you see him at home still covered in the mud of showing his family, look, this is who you brought into this. You guys did this. Eli did it.
Oh, yeah.
Eli made that deal because he was like, I want to get some for myself here. And he brought him in, but he's going to take his anger out, just like every other bullying incident. Yeah, he gets bullied by somebody else, so he bullies somebody else, and it's the never-ending chain of bullies. You see him, and he just takes Abel out, who's this meek little man who can't do anything about it. He's probably going to go end up beating Mary Sunday because of it.
Yeah, calling him stupid for letting him in, being gullible, just ripping into him.
But it was all Eli's idea to begin with. He's like, I want money if you're going to do this.
Next, we see Henry show up at Daniel's house. And I think this kind of echoes a little bit of when Paul showed up with Daniel. As we see Henry sitting outside of the house, Daniel is approaching, and Henry is claiming to be his brother from another mother. I thought that line was pretty funny. Daniel is initially skeptical, but you can see he asks a few times, who are you? What are you doing here? He reiterates that. He's very skeptical of. However, they start to accept each other. He starts asking him details that only his brothers should know, and he is confirming them. So that kind of opens up the door, and Henry now is able to come into the story.
And I think you see here right at the beginning that Daniel Plainview wants a family. Because he's in, as soon as he does his little test, which he didn't do a big test on him. He did this, hey, I'm going to test a couple things to make sure you know who you're talking about. And then he instantly asks, was your mother this woman? Like giving the answer to the guy, wanting this like recognition of, hey, I need somebody in my corner who's related to me, who's like me.
I was surprised when he did that because he is so cautious and he is a smart man. He wouldn't ask a question like that unless he wanted that answer.
Yeah.
He should have just asked, who is your mother?
Yep. And you'll see too, as a little bit later on in this scene, he already just like unloads his stuff like it's his own personal therapist. He's like, I have that. One of the most famous lines for me in this movie is, I have a competition in me. And he says that I don't want to see others succeed.
Is this after they work a little bit together and then they start drinking together and are hanging out around that fire? He's pretty drunk and then he just tells him everything. He doesn't want other people to succeed. He hates most people. He looks at people, sees nothing worth liking, and wants to make enough money to get away from people. And he's struggling to accept HW's deafness, thinks it might go away. And yeah, he's just telling all his bad traits to this Henry guy.
I've been carrying this around for so long, I need to unload on somebody. And you'll see how that comes back to hurt Henry later on, knowing that he deceived him. Just after this, in the script, there is a deleted scene where him and Henry are drunk together and they go to a brothel. And I find this a very interesting scene because it like totally departs from the idea of the movie. I can see why they cut it.
Romance and stuff.
Yeah, no romance. He goes to a brothel with this girl. There is a vivid written scene about him eating a girl out.
Oh.
And it shows he's like grabbing his hair and he wipes stuff off his face. And then he goes back to Henry and he says, my cock doesn't work. That's why how can I make a kid HW isn't mine?
Oh, interesting.
And I found it really weird that he said cock and it's written in that. And whoa.
Yeah, it is a very stark word.
Yeah. And he said, my cock doesn't work. And the first time I ever watched this movie, I didn't realize that HW wasn't his kid. It was hard for me
to make that connection at the beginning?
No, because it was hard for me to recognize that it was Daniel Day-Lewis with that beard and everything else. I thought that was just like some random side person. Took me until the end of watching it the first time. Oh, that wasn't a kid. After the deleted scene, HW find the journal. And they don't talk about what he finds. And I get the sense that HW is illiterate at this point. Because when he's looking at the book, it's upside down.
Then he goes on and sets the house on fire. He doesn't necessarily know what he's seeing. Why would he set the house on fire type of thing?
Yeah. And so that's contradictory to my point. And I agree with you. It was like, he must have saw something that was like, oh, that's not your brother. And he didn't know how to vocalize it or didn't want to say anything. So he tries to just kill the guy.
He still is deaf. He doesn't really know how to communicate. Daniel has not even made an effort to try to communicate with him. All he does is try to talk to him still, and he can't hear. He doesn't try to sign. I know it's sign language. None of them knew at the moment, but he doesn't even try to motion.
But I also find it interesting, and to the point of him being illiterate, he never tries to write anything down for him.
Nope.
Which would be another way of, I'm like, now I'd be like, oh, I'll send you a text if you can't hear me, you know?
Yep.
But I like that scene when you can almost sense that Daniel doesn't think that HW started the fire, and then all of a sudden when he goes to run outside, HW runs away, and there's that unspoken dialogue, which is like all throughout this movie. He looks at him, he's like, oh, you fucking did this. And then he starts chasing him. And it's a great scene. The camera stays in the same spot.
I was very curious what was going to happen when he caught him. I thought he was going to beat the shit out of him.
Same.
And then, he just carries him back. And then we don't know what happens as it immediately cuts to Daniel shipping HW off to San Francisco. And they're sitting there on that train together. HW doesn't really know what's going on. And all he says is like, oh, I'll be right back. Don't worry. And then walks off, never looks back, never looks over. The train starts going. HW starts freaking out and crying. And then his right-hand man is there to keep HW on the train. And Daniel never looks up.
He can't bear the thought of looking at it. And you know he could hear it because I could hear it in the screen saying, oh, God.
He doesn't have that courage to say goodbye.
Right. And doesn't know how to communicate it. And like literally can't communicate it with HW.
No. Been one of his biggest flaws.
Exactly. Yeah. So you get to that point. He is done. He sends him away.
Oil.
Oh, yeah. Again, you see this like family man who's deep hidden. So after HW gets sent away, he goes to the Standard Oil meeting to try to sell some of his land, some of his oil derricks. And you can see that inner family man that Daniel wants is hurting at that time. So he's clawing to get out. And the Standard Oil guy says twice about, oh, you could spend time with your son. And that second time,
that's what sets him.
Where Daniel's, say that again, and I will cut your throat.
Yeah, he just like blows up on the meeting. It feels like out of nowhere. They're very confused. They're like, what happened? And Daniel's just going off and just saying, nope, I'm going to be the one to succeed. You don't need my land. I'm going to take it and I'm going to do something better.
And you can see, it's funny because every bit of Daniel's business dealings have always involved family once he started oil. Every time he's tried to make a business deal, it was a family. And as soon as somebody turned that on him, he instantly called and was like, I don't like that. Do not try to play that game on me. That's my card.
And then that forces him to then go out and expand and try to buy more land. And then, like he's now pissed, especially at Bandy, the one holdout from earlier that wouldn't sell his land. And that's when he wants to deal with it now.
And he goes out and tries to do this. I find it interesting that the right man of Daniel asks him in a very subtle, meek voice that really doesn't get picked up. He says, are you bringing Henry with you for your Union Oil meeting? Daniel never answers. I'm bringing Henry in. He's in. And that kind of shows the audience. He's brought Henry into his inner circle. He's the guy who's going to do everything now.
Yep.
Great montage going.
Oh, the red stakes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, and there's a good little bit of score in there I enjoy.
Yeah. That was one thing I actually wanted to bring up because I know you're really big into symbolism. The one thing I noticed as they're doing the montage of all the staking was that they were all like bright red stakes. Do you think that meant anything specifically?
It didn't register to me, but now thinking back on the scene, it does make sense that like maybe this is the vein, the lifeblood that's going to get him out here. This is, I'm setting my own like blood trail to get to where I need to be. So after they do the montage, Daniel banging the stake into the table at Union Oil, making the deal. Everybody's happy. This is great. They're like exactly what he wanted to do. And then it jumps to him and Henry at the beach swimming, like celebrating. At this point, Daniel asks Henry a question saying, oh, let's go get some women, Henry says to him. And then Daniel says, yeah, take him to the Peachtree Dams, which is like it must be some sort of Fond du Lac
connection with his actual half-brother.
Yeah. Oh, we'll take him to the Peachtree Dams. This is Fond du Lac. This is where we'd go, like a kissing circle or naked beach or whatever the heck you want to call it. He does that. He sees that Henry doesn't answer correctly. And you can see again, Daniel
That
Day-Lewis's eyes change and his mouth changes. He gets this almost animalistic look. He like lets his lips hang out and he's ooh, wait a minute, what? And then it cuts to him in the ocean looking back at Henry being like, I fucking know this guy's lying.
Yeah, there's something afoot. And then I think that's reassured the next night when Henry's drunk and Daniel asks for money. And like, he's still just, something's not quite right. He hasn't quite got it all the way yet.
He's planning, I'm going to fucking kill this guy.
And then he doubles down on that doubt when he wakes up Henry at gunpoint demanding answers. And that's when Henry finally admits he's not his real brother, but just like a drifter who knew the real Henry and just took his story. And in that bit of rage, Daniel just one shot right to the head and just holds him and just watches him.
Yeah, and I will say this too, the guy who plays Henry, great death on screen.
Oh, yeah.
Death. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, I got shot, die. He did that like body convulsing kind of thing. It was so believable, and it's like, it's terrifying.
Yeah, and then you see that deranged look on Daniel's face, and just like
his eyes, when it cuts back to him after Henry says his story, Daniel's eyes, you're like, oh my God, what is this man gonna do? Those eyes to me are like, oh my.
Yeah, and it just reinforces like that temperament problem that Daniel has. It's just like that rage that just builds and then snaps.
Yeah, and then another cut to him being woken up because he got drunk after burying him.
I do want to talk one thing about that.
Go ahead.
So when we're burying the body of Henry, Daniel starts digging the hole and they throw Henry's body in. Henry is in the grave with oil at the bottom.
See, I didn't see it as oil. I thought it was water because they were by the beach.
It was dark. It was pitch black.
I could see the symbolism then.
Yeah, so that's why I was just like, everything Daniel does is tainted with this oil. Like the oil is following him everywhere. Every bad thing is because of oil in his life.
Yeah.
And it's just connecting all the blood, all the death, all the oil together.
Yeah, that is, and that makes more sense to progress the story along too, to be like, oh, there's this oil at his feet. Like, I got to bury my problems in this oil because that's where all my problems are.
Yeah, then Daniel is woken up again in the morning, drunk, after burying Henry, this time by Bandy. And Bandy knows of his crimes, of what he just did.
Yep.
And he's wanting him to join the church and be baptized.
Yeah, which is, and Daniel fights tooth and nail. He's like, I'll pay you $5,000.
Woken up and then he's asking him to be baptized. And he just doesn't care. He's just like throwing numbers out. Like, I just want your land.
Right. And I'll tell you this. I've woken up a few times where people have started asking me questions. I love that scene when he gets woken up because it's so realistic. It's not like he does that, who's it? Like totally startled.
And then, yeah, he just keeps refusing, but he offers him a deal to let Daniel use the land if Daniel agrees to be baptized in Eli's church.
And I think that's where we cut to the next scene of him going back to the church.
Yeah, because he just reluctantly agrees anything to just progress his pipeline. And then it goes right into the baptism.
Yeah, which is a great scene. And that was the cool thing about that. It was that scene was filmed the day after the scene where Daniel beats the shit out of Eli.
Yeah, that's terrific on the director's part to get that type of emotion out of it.
Yeah, so you could see like Eli wanted to get a little bit of retribution, or Paul Dano wanted the same thing.
Eli just takes the opportunity to humiliate Daniel publicly, makes him admit all the terrible things he's done that he knows about, and hitting him deep where he knows he's a coward, he's abandoned his boy.
And just keeps hitting that, you've abandoned your boy.
Over and over again.
Because he didn't see that reaction.
And then Eli takes the opportunity to slap the shit out of him in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And then you can see Daniel's face is just filled with that anger and rage. He just has to hold it back to just get through this, because this will make everything else better.
Yeah, exactly. And then at the end of that scene, you can see him after he gets the water over him and the blood. You can see he says instantly, he goes, let's build a pipeline, under his breath.
Yeah.
And it's, oh yeah, he'll
He's just going through
sacrifice
the motion
himself.
to get exactly what he needed.
Yep. Then it cuts directly to, he comes back and he has his own moment of retribution of saying, okay, everything's fine. They're together. Daniel, when HW comes back, Daniel run out to HW. The camera stays in the same spot. Super long shot. And then you see Daniel walk all the way back around into a different frame. And the camera kind of moves over to him. And that's when he goes, oh, let's get a look at you. And HW just smacks him across the face. And you can see, and again, with that, he wants to be a family man, but he's not. He lets HW hit him and doesn't give it back.
He lets him throw those punches, yeah.
In fact, he says the line, he knows he deserved it. He needs to get that beating.
All Daniel thinks he can do right now is just taking him out to a fancy restaurant.
Right.
But it was fun to see the town evolve exactly as Daniel depicted it. They have employment, they have jobs, they have water at the bar, and you got to see that expansion like he promised at the beginning. So you start to realize this Daniel guy is a fucking terrible person, but you got to respect him. Like, he's doing exactly what he's saying he's going to do.
I'll remember that line, Brody, when we talk about other people. No, because he does. And that's, I mean, if you think about that in the context of America now, that's what's happening. All these people are just scraping resources that we have. Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. They're sucking every little bit of resource out around us and then saying, well, look, we're making life better for you. I can deliver things in 2 days. I can send people up to space. I give you social media.
Yeah. We have this advancing technology, but at what cost?
And then the way he covers his face, too, when they're at the fancy restaurant and calls that dude out from Standard Oil.
So then Stanford Oil folks show up and Daniel's tempers immediately flare. You can see he starts to go off on them. He puts the napkin over his face so that HW can't read his lips. Yep. And he's just trying to get the better of the Standard Oil guys a little bit and throw it in their face.
Yeah, it's a great scene, in my opinion. He's starting to get some resolution that he's made somewhat good choices, like saying F you to the Standard Oil people, which he didn't like to begin with. He talks about the railroad prices and all that before he even has those meetings. You offered me $1 million for this. Look at me now.
Yeah, it's not enough that he's successful. He has to rub other people's nose in his success for him to get enjoyment out of it.
And he even goes over to the table, grabs that dude's drink, chugs it, and then he goes, I remember what I told you, basically.
Then we get a few little small scenes here. Eli heads out on a mission. We get to see Daniel hire a sign language interpreter to communicate with HW. For me personally, I didn't realize that ASL was even a thing back then. I had to look that up and found out, had origins all the way back to 1817. And ASL was a little bit more widely established and actually used in the early 1900s.
It's got its origins, interestingly enough, from the Native Americans.
Oh,
the Native Americans had a language that they spoke with their hands, like a lot of them did, and it was called hand talking. And a lot of American Sign Language is pulled directly from that.
Fast.
Yeah, so this has been going on for centuries, and ASL just made it formal in a way. Going back to that mission scene, when Eli goes on his mission, you can see Daniel watching him through looks at the train station. As soon as Eli leaves and the train goes by, you can see light go onto Daniel's face. Almost like the director is trying to say,
his
Eli,
worries are gone right now.
Yeah, Eli was the problem. This conflict between the two of them was causing the issue. Not necessarily that he wasn't religious or that Daniel was trying to rip resources from everybody else, but the conflict between the two of them was the problem. With them being separated, you can see Daniel jump out, and later on you find out that Eli has also gone out and done his own thing.
And I think that's why we feel like we can jump so far ahead, is they are separate, because that is the main tension throughout this movie, is them two together. Then we jump to 1927. HW and Mary are getting married, and then have that short little scene, cut to the fancy ass home, which turns out to be Daniel's mansion now. He's just drunk shooting random things in his house, and there's bullet holes everywhere in this mansion, but it has a pretty cool bowling alley.
Very cool bowling alley. And interesting side fact about that house is that it was actually commissioned by Edward Doheny for one of his siblings, but that's who Daniel Plainview is based on. So bringing back the connection to real life, you get to see that, oh, they're actually filming in this house, and that's who that house was.
Yeah, that is
for.
cool that they were able to make that connection.
Yep. And then Daniel jump into this like crazy person persona. He's got his little eyeglass and he's shooting down the hallway. And then it cuts to older HW coming down the hallway, who is actually played by a real deaf person. His name is Russell Harvard. He's actually deaf in real life, which I thought was very interesting and good inclusion on that. You see him go into the office and try to tell Daniel some bad news. And this is taken directly from the book. That is an issue that happens somewhere in the middle of the book about HW trying to go off on his own. In the book, Daniel is upset about it, but he doesn't get as mad as he does in the movie.
Yeah, HW brings along his translator, who is Daniel, one of Daniel's right-hand man that he hired to be the translator, which I found very fascinating that Daniel pretty much gave HW one of his right hand as his official translator throughout all this. HW is trying to cut all ties with Daniel and say, I want to go start up a business down in Mexico. Daniel's thinking it's just, no, you'll become competition. You can't do that. And he's just in this drunken stupor of, no, you can't leave me. Yeah. You leaving me is like the last thing I still have.
And you can see that mentality change as soon as he says, I want to go to drill. And he like does the hand sign for drilling. I want to go drill in Mexico. And he goes, that makes you my competition. And he changes instantly to be like, I am going to now bury you underground. I am going to destroy you.
Yeah, you're no longer my son.
Right. And interesting side fact about him trying to go down and drill in Mexico. Daniel was actually giving him good advice because it wasn't many years later that Mexico nationalized their oil industry, so he would have lost a ton of money.
So he was looking before.
He's a savvy businessman.
Says HW is not his son, never has been. He's an orphan and just keeps cutting HW down. Says he's a bastard, but lower than that he's a bastard in a basket.
What a great line. One of the best disses that I've ever heard. You're a bastard from a basket. Oh, man. Talk about cutting to the core.
Yeah. And the whole time during like this communication with HW, he's just sitting there mocking like the sign language of like how he has to communicate and says, no, you say, I want to hear you say it.
Yeah.
And it makes him actually verbally say, no, I want to go down to Mexico.
What a shitty thing to do as a person. Like totally cutting out any sense of a family man. He is now isolated on his own. He will never have a family again.
Yeah. And as he's rambling drunkenly about bastard in a basket over and over again, it's just Daniel never has been able to maintain one genuine human relationship.
That's what he sacrificed to have this life of lavish that he has now.
Yeah, he has this massive mansion, but he's alone, getting drunk every day. And you get to see that. He barely can make it down the stairs sometimes.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to the bowling alley with Daniel drunk, passed out again. His butler's there trying to wake him up, telling him, hey, this preacher's here to see you.
Not just passed out in the bowling alley with his head in the gutter.
Yeah, and it takes him a while to get woke up.
The only way he wakes up is that Eli says, Brother Daniel, it's Eli. And then you can see
when
he's like, the fuck did you just say to me?
This guy came out of nowhere, out of the woodworks.
And you can see again, he's had a family trauma to himself. He's done with HW and he needs to take that anger out on somebody else.
And as soon as he gets up, he immediately just starts chugging out of his flat.
Himself on the back of the head, trying to be like, ew, ew, ew.
Yeah, we have Eli with some bling here.
Yeah.
Down. So obviously it looks like he had some success. And Eli, we're now learning, is older. He's a successful radio preacher, bringing his show of preaching performance to the world. However, he's sitting there asking for money and support from Daniel.
He wants the $10,000 with interest and $100,000 for the bandy tract.
Yeah, so he's sitting there now trying to sell him the bandy land instead of just using it. And you start to see that power dynamic shift.
Yeah.
Daniel, you really start to see now he has the upper hand.
Yeah, Daniel's got that ace up his sleeve. He goes, oh yeah, that's only fair. We'll give you what you want. You just have to say that you're a false prophet and God is a superstition. And Eli tries to be like, God, I'm a false prophet and God is
what you want me to say.
Yeah, he does it really quick and he goes, say it like it was your sermon, and gets him to like totally destroy himself the same way that Eli made Daniel destroy
During the
himself
baptism.
during the baptism.
Yeah, he used that opportunity to make him look like a fool, even though there's no audience.
Right.
That him alone is enough
Uh-huh.
to get that satisfaction of him admitting that he is a sinner, admitting that he is a false prophet, that he is fake. He doesn't believe in his religion. He's only doing this for show, just like he's only doing all these things for success himself.
Exactly. Yeah. You can feel that tension building. And I don't think there's any score at this part. You just see them going back and forth in this battle, and you're like, man, it's about to get hype.
Yeah, and Daniel's just sitting there mocking him while he's doing all this, taunting him for his failures, denouncing his faith, and then that's where we get the famous line.
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
Don't bully me, Daniel.
Did you think your song and dance and your superstition would help you, Eli? I am the third revelation. I am who the Lord has chosen. Because I'm smarter than you.
Interesting about that line, and I referenced this earlier, is that is taken directly from the Teapot Dome congressional hearing. That was used to describe how oil works for some things. And I didn't find the exact quote for it here yet, but everyone references the fact that that was actually taken. Those were real words from the Edward Doheny.
Interesting.
They took that and he said, I'll drink your milkshake. And that's where it reaches the apex of that scene.
And that's where Daniel in his drunken rage really just snaps and starts throwing the bowling balls and pins at Eli, eventually knocks him out, and then bashes him over the head.
I like in that scene when he's starting to throw things at him and beat him, you can hear it. He's saying some things, but by the end of it, he's like beating him. He's breathing like this. And then you can hear and see his face change when he hits him that really hard time and he knows he's dead. He's like, ha, 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 ho, ho. And it's, because you never really get to see the head bashed in like you would nowadays. You just see Daniel's face. And that is that scene where you're like, oh, he's not coming back from this. And Daniel's eyes can show you like, oh no, that dude's dead.
But then you just see him sit down and he's just sitting there breathing, heavy breathing. Daniel's butler comes in, Mr. Daniel?
Yeah.
And just watching him out of breath next to Eli's body. He just calmly turns around and looks and just says, I'm finished.
Yeah, I'm finished, which is like a great way to end the movie because it's I'm finished thinking that he just killed somebody and someone knows him, he might be done with his life. I'm finished in the idea that the movie's over. I'm finished. And in the idea that, oh, I'm finished with everything I need to do in my life. I'm good.
And that's almost the way I took it, was that last one where, yeah, he completed the whole arc. He completed the battle. That's what everything was leading up to, was them two confronting. And it doesn't matter that his butler came in and saw he's powerful. He's a powerful man, has a lot of wealth. He has nothing to be afraid of back then. Yeah, people come and clean it up and
Right.
nobody will ever know. And that's how it would have been.
Yeah, it's a great ending to that movie. One little tidbit about that. Paul Thomas Anderson wanted to paint that whole bowling alley white to do an homage to Stanley Kubrick.
I think it would have looked too weird.
I think so too. And that's what they ended up doing. They kept it original to try to pay homage to Edward Doheny and what was going on in the house. Let's dive into a little bit about some of the themes and the poignant parts of it that really stuck out to us. I saw there were 3 main themes that a lot of people talked about with this. One was the American dream, which I think you can see right from the beginning. 2 was the separation of church and state. And 3 was like self-reliance and emptiness, like a loneliness kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. I can see all those. The last one not as strongly as the other ones. Especially we see that American dream of how terrible of a person he was and how much he sacrificed. Like you said from the very beginning, he's strapped up his bootstraps and like he got down dirty and he was there to better himself and he kept reinvesting the money. He kept doing everything you're supposed to do for the American dream, to come from nothing, to have this excess wealth, but at what cost?
Exactly. And I think that's what the director wanted to show us in this, and it's my own personal view on it, is that the American dream in itself is flawed. The idea that like, hey, you can get these kind of things, but you're going to sacrifice a lot to get there. And you look at somebody who's won the game, won the American dream, Daniel Plainview, and he has nothing at the end. He says, I'm finished. He just got done killing somebody, the second person he's killed. He has all of the money and wealth that he could ever want, and he's alone. And I do think a little bit it runs in that emptiness, loneliness. But I didn't agree with this separation of church and state. I didn't see that theme through this. If anything, I saw that there was a battle between spirituality and business-mindedness.
But then at the end, when Eli is admitting that it was fake, do you believe him, or is he just saying that to Daniel to try to appease Daniel, or was he a phony?
I think that's a good point to make, is that when you see Daniel in the baptism scene, he says, I've abandoned my boy. And then he gets hit on him again. And you can see his eyes change, and it's something that really cuts to him. Oh, I have abandoned my kid, and I don't want to admit this in front of anybody else. And if you take that sort of feel and jump to that final scene when Daniel is making Eli do the same thing, the first time Eli says it, he goes, oh, I'm a false prophet. God is a superstition. Doesn't say it with really any gusto. And by the second or third time, you can see Eli
like scream.
It's like, I actually might be cutting to his core, being like, this is something that actually really troubles me. And I know I'm not
he does
talking
put
about
on such a performance when he is preaching, and he's there for that showmanship. And you can tell by the way he is talking. It is a different Eli from when we saw him earlier in the small town. Like, you can tell he's made it big, and he's a little more successful. He has that confidence and that swagger.
Yep. I agree with you. I didn't see it as a separation of church and state. I saw it as the battle between the two, and that kind of gets characterized in Daniel and Eli.
Yeah, that's what this whole movie is, right? That character, Daniel is that character driven by greed, ambition, little regard for religion or morality, and the whole movie is just about their battle.
Yeah.
However, Daniel is still like the main focus of it.
Yep. And he wins in the end.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic character study. Do you think anybody else could have played Daniel besides him? PTA wrote this specifically for Daniel without even knowing him and hoping that he would sign on for it.
Yeah, and Daniel talks about this, and we'll get into this when we talk about characters, but he says, I would have taken anything from Paul Thomas Anderson. Like, I loved him as a director, so there's this mutual respect between the two. I don't think anyone else could have played that character correctly.
So many good character study style movies out there, and we can look at it. These actors that play these roles, like Taxi Drivers, Robert De Niro, Forrest Gump, Tom Hanks, Manchester by the Sea, Casey Affleck. There's a handful of these character study movies. And can you see any of these actors being swapped out for another one? It would completely change it. It would be completely different.
Yeah, it would be totally different. And it couldn't be. I'm knowing now what I know about the movie and watching it. And in full transparency, I've watched this movie probably 50 to 60 times.
That's wild.
I love this movie. I remember my dad showing this to me when it came out. I remember watching the Oscars if Daniel was going to win. And I'm being like, dang, this is a good movie. And I knew it then.
Do you have any other themes specifically or things you want to talk about?
No, that was actually the biggest thing, is denying the separation of church and state thing and really just hitting on the American dream. That's what it was. And we talked about that through the progression of the movie.
One thing that struck me a lot during watching this movie is you have to be paying attention to this movie to fully understand what is going on. You can't miss much. There's so many little scenes that add and build to this tension and to this battle between them. And you have to piece this narrative together a little bit. And it's not in your face like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind when we watched that and talked about it, where things were being explained to you about the colors and about the symbolism and about the story. There's very little explicitly mentioned about what is going on. The first 15, 16 minutes are dialogueless, and you just have to watch the visuals of what is happening to make sense.
Yeah, that's a huge thing too. And I think it really plays into the rewatchability of this movie. This movie, for me, and one of the reasons I've watched it so many times, is that you pick up something new every time. You're like, oh, look at that. In the scene when Daniel and HW first meet Eli, when they comes out to bring him wood, you can see this little shot, this little look that they give each other. And there's nothing said, And it's just this little, look, just like that Paul guy. And they're both trying to deal with it, but they never say anything about it. And it's those little things that you can pick up through character studies that you're like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And you feel like you're really in the mind of Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, I would be curious to rewatch this movie because this was my first time seeing it. And I feel like even though I was very intently paying attention, I was taking detailed notes during this movie, more notes than I've taken before. But for me, the pacing of the movie was a little slow for me. That's one issue I personally had.
That was a common criticism.
It was very slow for me, I would say, for the first 2/3 of the movie. But then that last third, I was just locked in. And I couldn't wait for what was happening. And that was the highlight for me in the movie.
I would say that if you watch it again, you'll find that first 2/3 of the movie fly by. You'll pick up a lot more. It's like watching a movie with subtitles. The first time you watch a movie with subtitles, you're like, I didn't really watch much of that. I was reading a lot. And then the second time, you're like, oh, I get what these characters are doing.
Necessarily need to pay attention.
I know what they say in this. I get the idea at the end, but then you see it and you pick up more in the non-spoken dialogue.
Yeah, for me, this is where I get into the criticisms of the movie, where I feel like, is this movie trying to be more artsy? Does it feel like it's trying to be artsy in order to be like an Oscar-nominated movie? That's why I couldn't tell. That's where I was struggling with it.
On the same thing, the release date of that being in December 25th, that is prime Oscar release time.
Yeah, it's the last couple movies that they're trying to make it into the year. It's in audiences' minds. It's in judges' minds.
And they put that out there, so it's like right there. So I can see you making that assumption, be like, oh, is it trying to be too artsy? But then we have to remember it is 2006, 2007 when they filmed this. I mean, there was artsy movies out there, but none that had hit this sort of level.
Yeah.
I think this movie was the first one that kind of brought, I won't say art house because everyone's like art, blah, blah, blah. But it brings that sort of like mentality into it of being, it's a character study. It's not like action gore movie. It's not Lord of the Rings. It's not Gladiator. It's not Training Day. It's totally different. Takeaway of this was the difference between Daniel Day-Lewis's preparation and Paul Dano's preparation. We alluded to this a little bit earlier. Daniel Day-Lewis saw this character 2 years before it ever reached the screen. And he prepared every day for this role. I mean, he listened to audio recordings to try to develop Daniel Plainview's voice. He listened to the Teapot Dome scandal and like really immersed himself in this world for 2 years. And juxtapose that to Paul. He was originally going to play that small little role, gets switched to play Eli after
Which is
that.
in the entire movie.
Yeah. He had 3.5 days to prepare for this.
That's wild. Especially for a young actor earlier in their career, only having done a couple of movies, to have 3 days just be thrown in.
Yeah, imagine being like, oh, hey, I'm, Joe Schmo off the street and I'm not doing anything. And someone goes, hey, you got to fight Mike Tyson on Tuesday. You're like, oh, wait, what? Because when you're jumping into the ring with Daniel Day-Lewis, you're like, this is the greatest of all time. For Paul Dano to be right up there with him in this movie is a huge testament to who he is as an actor.
And one thing that I saw looking into a little bit of this, Quentin Tarantino, he doesn't like this movie.
Really?
Yeah. Quentin Tarantino is one of PTA's good friends and was giving him notes. And he says, the one note I'll give you is Paul Dano. He was bad.
No way.
He did not like Paul Dano.
No, I would have never thought that.
I feel like when they swapped out the actor to Paul Dano, I'm glad they did. I enjoyed Paul Dano in this. I thought this really showed what he was able to do.
In the same sense, I don't know if you could have put anybody else in this role and had the same character.
Especially with 3 days notice.
Right. I think he was just as strong as Daniel Day-Lewis was in this. And I'm really surprised that Tarantino said that. So let's do a little bit of ethical questions here at the end. Just to summarize a little bit. Was Daniel right in the way that he abandoned his child? Did he abandon him?
I think he could have done it in a better way.
Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily had to be, I'm abandoning. It could have been, hey, I want to send you to a deaf school in San Francisco for you to learn how to communicate a little bit better. That whole thing could have gone down a lot smoother.
100%. Yeah.
I think Daniel should have taken a little bit of time to learn how to communicate with him, even though he couldn't hear. he should have taken effort to try to figure that out, to try to get that across of what he was trying.
Yeah, and I can agree with that too. But I would have changed his character in the same way. You wouldn't have looked at Daniel Plainview as this staunch dickhead.
Yeah, so in the way that he did it, I will say no, he shouldn't.
But it was, if you're thinking about it in morality sense, it was wrong. Like
Yeah, it definitely was wrong. You can see that when HW is older and they're having that conversation. HW had a fucked up life growing up. He did not have a good relationship with his father.
Right. And then it gets totally destroyed at the end where Daniel's, I don't give a shit anymore.
Yeah, you're cut off.
Was Eli right in telling Daniel to introduce him during the inaugural scene?
Yeah, I think that goes to some of their character flaws, like their arrogance and their confidence, for both of them, of being able to just think, hey, I can go in and try to demand what I want and get what I want. And I think that just highlights that. Could he have gone about it in a different way? Sure. Would Daniel have been receptive to it in a different way? Probably not. He probably done the same thing. So
true. Yeah, no, I agree with you. The characters would not have lended themselves to doing it in a different way. If Eli would have done it in a different way, it may have worked out for him. Maybe not. And then the final question that I wanted to ask was, did Daniel or Eli change for the good?
I don't think either of them changed from their toxic character traits. I think they both leaned into, like I said, that arrogance, that desire for success of trying to better themselves at all costs. We don't exactly know what Eli did when he went away for his mission and became the radio preacher, but he obviously did enough to be successful, but something is wrong where he needs to come and basically get on his knees and beg one rival for money.
He says in that too, the devil has grabbed a hold of me in ways I couldn't even have imagined. He is a sinner.
It had to be bad for him to be there to ask Daniel for money.
Exactly, going to his arch nemesis for it. And I agree with you that I don't think they changed at all. Speaking about the Academy and a little bit about the Oscars, they love a movie where no one fucking changes. Nothing happens. They love that kind of movie. It's the same character throughout the entire movie, and you basically just get like a glimpse of their life. What I see this as, and that's where the whole character study is. I don't think this guy's going to change, but I need to learn about who he is while we're watching it.
The one thing that stuck out to me with my criticisms of the movie is I still can't decide if the movie itself was overall good or just Daniel's performance was good in an okay movie. That's where I'm struggling. Like, I had fun. I enjoyed the movie. I really liked it. Daniel's performance was amazing. And he won an Oscar for it, rightfully.
Became one of only 8 people to win an Oscar for Best Actor twice.
That's where I'm left with it. I liked the movie. I enjoyed it. But overall, I can't tell if the movie itself was good or just Daniel and Paul Dano were standouts.
I think that, at least especially with, I can say this about Eli and Daniel Plainview, 2 characters are so good because of their actors and because of the writing to bring them into this world. Mm-hmm. So I think that, to argue with you a bit, is that this movie is great, not just because of what happens during the film, but how these characters play it, and that's what makes it one of the best movies of all time.
Oh, you're going down on that hill saying one of the best movies of all time.
I've rated a lot of movies, around 850 movies I've watched and rated and really watched. This is one of about 12 movies that I rated a perfect 10 out of 10. This movie is, bar none, one of the best movies you can watch when you're sitting there with friends or alone or whatever. Throw this movie on and just watch these characters evolve.
So for me, I would probably give this an 8 out of 10. Daniel's performance, 10 out of 10. You can't argue with anything that he did. But for me, it was like the pacing, some of the narrative choices, but overall, beautifully shot, beautifully scored, beautifully acted.
What you're saying is the sum of the parts are lesser than the whole. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you, but you're fucking wrong. But
you can look at a handful of movies that are like that, where the main actor might have been a character study, but they definitely killed the movie. But overall, the movie, I don't think was as good as it should have been.
I can
a couple of the movies that I put down, J. Edgar, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, that movie sucked.
But he did an excellent job.
Yeah.
He was great. If you saw The Judge with Robert Downey Jr.,
Yeah.
He did an amazing performance. But
Yeah, and I'm gonna disagree with you because the writing and everything went into the studying from Daniel Day-Lewis, the quick performance from Paul Dano.
performances.
I know they're great performances, but the only way they have those performances is because of the writing and because of the movie. It's a fantastic film. And I don't know how to drill this into your head, Brody.
I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. I just think that there are a few flaws.
It's like that scene from Friends when the blonde girl tries to get Joey to pronounce Gemma Pell. He's like, Gemma Pell. And then he goes, it's better. That's how I feel right now. Yeah, I agree. No, you're wrong.
I agree with you. Excellent performances. Beautifully shot.
I can't wait to find out what your 10 out of 10 movie is. I'm going to pull a straight Daniel Day right here, and I'm going to hold my retribution until then and really rub it in your face around then.
We'll have to get there one day.
So we hoped you enjoyed today's episode, diving into the world of There Will Be Blood. If you have any thoughts, opinions, or favorite cringeworthy moments of the film, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts on Instagram and TikTok.
Stay tuned for more episodes in the near future. If you have any suggestions for movies we should watch, discuss, feel free to reach out, let us know. Thank you for tuning in Split Reels. Until next time, keep watching.
Keep exploring the world of cinema, baby.